In a quiet little town surrounded by green hills and old factories, there was a school where life wasn't always easy for everyone. Among the students, one boy stood out, not because he was loud or flashy, but because he seemed invisible to most people. His name was Marcus Johnson, a thin, wiry boy with deep brown skin and sharp eyes that often seemed lost in thought. He didn't talk much, preferring instead to keep his head down and stay out of trouble. To many of his classmates, Marcus was just another kid from the poorer side of town, someone who wore hand-me-down clothes and carried a backpack patched together with duct tape. But what no one realized, what Marcus never let them see, was that behind his quiet demeanor lay a mind unlike any other. While the other kids laughed and played during recess, Marcus would sit alone under a tree, sketching strange diagrams in a battered notebook. Those drawings weren't random scribbles. They were plans for machines and inventions far beyond anything anyone at the school could imagine. But Marcus kept this part of himself hidden, afraid of what might happen if others found out. The truth was, Marcus had always been different. From a young age, he'd shown an unusual curiosity about how things worked. When he was 6, he took apart an old radio just to figure out why it made noise. By 10, he'd built his first working flashlight using scraps he found in a junkyard. His hands were steady, his mind quick, and his ideas bold. Yet none of this mattered at school, where kids judged him not by what he could do but by how he looked and acted. Every day, as Marcus walked through the hallways, he faced taunts and jeers from the same group of bullies. They called him names, like Zero and Brainless, laughing at his worn-out sneakers and the way he flinched whenever they got too close. Sometimes they'd snatch his notebook away, flipping through its pages and mocking the strange symbols and sketches. Inside, "What's this? Some kind of secret code?" One of them sneered once, holding the notebook high above Marcus's head so he couldn't reach it. Marcus didn't fight back. Instead, he waited silently until they grew bored and tossed the book onto the floor. Then he picked it up, brushed off the dirt, and slipped it back into his bag without saying a word. Lunchtime was the hardest part of Marcus's day. While most kids gathered in noisy groups, sharing jokes and trading snacks, Marcus sat alone at the edge of the cafeteria. He usually brought a sandwich wrapped in foil and a small juice box, eating quickly so he could return to his favorite spot, a quiet corner near the library where no one bothered him. There, he'd pull out his notebook and lose himself in his thoughts, sketching new designs or jotting down notes in shorthand only he understood. It was his escape, a world where no one could hurt him. At home, Marcus lived in a tiny apartment with his younger sister, Tia, and their grandmother, who worked long hours cleaning offices to make ends meet. Their neighborhood wasn't the safest place, but Marcus didn't mind. In fact, he liked wandering the streets after school, searching for discarded treasures and piles of trash. Old wires, broken gadgets, and scraps of metal became raw materials for his experiments. Back in the cramped bedroom he shared with Tia, he transformed these bits and pieces into something extraordinary. Once, he even rigged up a makeshift alarm system for their front door using nothing but a few batteries and some copper wire. Despite his incredible talent, Marcus rarely showed his work to anyone. The only person who truly understood him was Tia, who idolized her big brother. She loved watching him tinker late into the night, her wide eyes filled with wonder as sparks flew from his soldering iron. "You're going to be famous someday, Marcus," she'd whisper sleepily, curled up on their shared mattress. Marcus would smile softly, ruffling her hair before turning back to his project. Deep down, though, he doubted anyone would ever take him seriously. After all, the world outside their apartment didn't seem interested in boys like him. Still, Marcus refused to give up. Every insult hurled at him, every cruel laugh that echoed in the hallway, fueled his determination to succeed. He began to dream bigger, imagining inventions that could change lives, not just his own, but those of people everywhere. One evening, as he stared at the flickering light of a candle, an idea came to him. What if he could turn sound into energy? The concept was wild, almost impossible, but Marcus couldn't shake it. Over the next several weeks, he poured all his energy into researching and testing the idea, determined to bring it to life. Though Marcus remained largely unnoticed by his peers, there were moments when his brilliance accidentally shone through. During math class, for instance, he solved complex problems in his head while the teacher struggled to explain them on the board. Or in science lab, when he corrected a mistake in the experiment setup without being asked. Each time the teacher would look surprised, but then quickly move on, assuming Marcus must have gotten lucky. No one stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, there was more to him than met the eye. As days turned into months, Marcus continued to endure the bullying, retreating further into his own world. But inside, something was shifting. The pain of rejection burned brightly alongside his growing ambition, creating a fire that wouldn't be extinguished. Little did anyone know, the quiet boy sitting alone in the cafeteria was harboring secrets that would soon astonish them all. Marcus's life might have seemed ordinary to an outsider, but inside his mind it was anything but. While other kids dreamed of video games, sports, or weekend parties, Marcus's thoughts were consumed by numbers, patterns, and possibilities. His brain was like a machine that never stopped running, constantly analyzing the world around him. He saw connections where others saw chaos, finding order in the hum of electricity, the rhythm of footsteps on pavement, and even the way raindrops splattered against windows. From the time he was very young, Marcus had been fascinated by how things worked. At 6 years old, he dismantled an old clock his grandmother kept on the kitchen counter, curious about what made its hands tick. When she scolded him for breaking it, he simply smiled and said, "I can fix it." And he did, though it took 3 days and several attempts. He eventually got the clock working again. By the time he turned 10, he'd moved on to more complicated projects like building a flashlight powered by sunlight. Using scraps of solar panels he found in a junkyard and some wires borrowed from an abandoned radio, he created something functional and entirely his own. But despite his incredible talent, Marcus rarely shared his creations with anyone. The world outside his home wasn't kind to boys like him, and he learned early on that showing off his work only invited ridicule. Once, when he proudly brought his solar-powered flashlight to school for show and tell, the class erupted in laughter. "What's the point of that thing?" one boy jeered. "It doesn't even look cool." The teacher tried to defend Marcus, saying it was impressive that he'd built it himself, but the damage was done. After that, Marcus kept his inventions hidden, sharing them only with Tia, who always cheered him on. At home, however, Marcus let his imagination run wild. In the cramped bedroom he shared with his sister, he transformed piles of discarded junk into tools, gadgets, and experiments. Their tiny apartment became a laboratory of sorts, filled with half-finished projects and strange contraptions. There was a fan made from an old computer motor, a water filtration system cobbled together from plastic bottles, and a miniature wind turbine that spun lazily when placed near an open window. To Tia, these inventions were magical, proof that her big brother could do anything he set his mind to. To Marcus, they were stepping stones, practice for something greater. That something greater began taking shape one rainy afternoon when Marcus stumbled upon an idea that would change everything. As he sat cross-legged on the floor, tinkering with a broken pair of headphones, he started thinking about sound. Sound was everywhere. The patter of rain, the rumble of cars driving past, the chatter of neighbors through thin walls. What if, he wondered, all that noise could be captured and converted into something useful? Could sound become energy? The question ignited a spark in Marcus's mind. Over the next few weeks, he threw himself into research, scouring library books and online articles for information about acoustics, vibrations, and energy conversion. He sketched endless diagrams, tested theories, and experimented with materials, scavenged from junkyards and dumpsters. Late at night, while Tia slept beside him, Marcus worked tirelessly, his fingers stained with grease and his notebook pages covered in calculations. His first prototype was crude, a small box rigged with wires and a microphone, but it worked, sort of. When Marcus clapped his hands near the device, a tiny LED bulb flickered weakly before going dark. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Encouraged by this small success, Marcus kept refining his invention, tweaking circuits and adjusting, components until the light stayed on longer and burned brighter. Each improvement brought him closer to his goal, fueling his determination to push further. Yet, as much as Marcus loved inventing, it wasn't just passion driving him forward. It was pain. Every insult hurled at him, every mocking laugh that followed him down the hallway, added fuel to the fire burning inside him. The bullies at school didn't know it, but their cruelty was shaping Marcus into someone unstoppable. Each taunt became a reminder of why he couldn't give up. If he succeeded, if he proved them wrong, it wouldn't just be for himself. It would be for every kid who ever felt invisible, underestimated, or dismissed because of where they came from or how they looked. One evening, as Marcus sat hunched over his workbench, Tia woke up and rubbed her eyes sleepily. "What are you making now?" she asked, yawning. "A machine," Marcus replied, not looking up from his project. "A machine that turns sound into power." Tia tilted her head, trying to understand. "Like magic?" "Not magic," Marcus said with a faint smile. "Science." She grinned, clearly impressed. "You're gonna change the world someday, Marcus." He paused, staring at the half-finished device in front of him. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe her. But then reality crept back in, reminding him of the obstacles still ahead. Changing the world wouldn't be easy, not for someone like him. Still, Marcus refused to let doubt take hold. He'd come too far to turn back now. As weeks turned into months, Marcus continued to pour his heart into the invention. He faced setbacks, of course, wires that snapped, circuits that fried, designs that failed. But each failure taught him something new. Slowly but surely, his creation began to take shape, becoming more than just an idea scribbled in a notebook. It was real, tangible, and alive in his hands. Unbeknownst to Marcus, his journey was about to intersect with an opportunity that would thrust him into the spotlight. Little did he know, the same school that had ignored and ridiculed him for so long would soon become the stage for his greatest triumph. But for now, Marcus remained focused, determined to finish what he'd started. The world may not have seen him yet, but when it did, it would never forget him. The announcement came on a chilly Monday morning, posted on the bulletin board outside the school cafeteria. Flyers fluttered in the breeze, their bold letters declaring, "Annual Science Fair, showcase your ideas." Winners would receive trophies, certificates, and, most importantly, scholarships to prestigious universities. For many students, it was just another boring event they had to endure, cobbling together last-minute projects with baking soda volcanoes or potato-powered clocks. But for Marcus, the news struck a chord deep within him. At first, he hesitated. The idea of standing in front of judges, exposing his invention to people who had mocked him for years, felt terrifying. What if they laughed again? What if his project failed, or worse, what if it worked and no one cared? Marcus wrestled with these thoughts late into the night, staring at the half-finished prototype sitting on his desk. His sister Tia noticed his unease and crawled out of bed to sit beside him. "Why don't you enter?" she asked softly, her voice breaking the silence. Marcus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not that simple, Tia. People aren't going to take me seriously." "But you're amazing," she insisted, her eyes wide with conviction. "You've worked so hard on this thing. Don't let them stop you." Her words lingered in his mind long after she went back to sleep. By morning, Marcus had made up his mind. He wouldn't do it for recognition or applause, he'd do it for himself. If nothing else, entering the science fair would prove, to himself, that he wasn't afraid anymore. Over the next few weeks, Marcus dedicated every spare moment to perfecting his sound-to-energy converter. He replaced frayed wires, polished metal parts until they gleamed, and redesigned the casing to make it sleeker and more professional looking. The final product was compact, about the size of a shoebox, with smooth edges and a small LED light mounted on top. When activated, it could convert ambient noise, like clapping or talking, into enough energy to power the light. On the day of the fair, Marcus arrived at school carrying his invention in a plain cardboard box. He avoided eye contact with the other students knowing full well that some of them were already whispering behind his back. "What's Zero doing here?" One boy snickered as Marcus passed by. Another girl rolled her eyes dramatically. "Probably gonna show us how to turn trash into more trash." Marcus ignored them, clutching the box tighter as he made his way to the gymnasium. Inside, rows of tables were set up, each displaying colorful posters and elaborate setups. Some projects looked impressive: a miniature robot programmed to follow, lines, a model of the solar system that lit up. But most were clearly thrown together at the last minute. Balloons floated above certain displays, marking entries from popular kids who expected to win without trying. Marcus found an empty table near the corner and began setting up his project. He placed the device carefully in the center, flanked by a simple poster explaining its function. Written in neat block letters, the title read, "Sound Energy Converter, Turning Noise into Power." Beneath it, Marcus had included diagrams and step-by-step instructions detailing how the machine worked. It wasn't flashy or eye-catching, but it was honest, and that mattered more to him than anything else. As the judging began, groups of students rotated between the tables, chatting loudly and occasionally laughing at the less impressive projects. When it was Marcus's turn to present, a small crowd gathered around him, though not out of curiosity. Many had come simply to mock him, eager to see what ridiculous contraption he'd brought. One of the bullies, a tall boy named Jake, smirked as he crossed his arms. "Let's see what Brainless cooked up this time," he muttered loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus took a deep breath, steadying himself. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the microphone attached to his device. "This is a sound-to-energy converter," he began, his voice quiet but steady. "It uses vibrations, from sound waves to generate electricity." He paused, glancing at the skeptical faces surrounding him. No one looked convinced. To demonstrate, Marcus leaned forward and clapped his hands sharply near the microphone. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the tiny LED bulb flickered to life, glowing brighter with each clap. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the light remained steady, powered solely by the noise in the room. Even the judges, who had been scribbling notes absent-mindedly, stopped to watch. "How does it work?" one of the judges asked, leaning closer. Marcus explained the process as simply as possible, pointing to different parts of the device. The microphone captures sound waves, which are then converted into electrical signals. These signals pass through a circuit and charge a small battery which powers the light. The judges exchanged astonished glances, murmuring among themselves. Meanwhile, the students who had come to ridicule Marcus now stared in stunned silence. Jake shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. A girl who had once teased Marcus whispered to her friend, "I didn't think he was actually smart." For the first time in his life, Marcus felt a sense of triumph, not because he'd silenced his critics, but because he'd proven something to himself. Standing there, surrounded by people who had doubted him, he realized that their opinions didn't define him. His worth wasn't measured by their approval. It was rooted in the passion and perseverance that had driven him to create something extraordinary. After the demonstration, several students lingered around Marcus's table, asking questions about his invention. Some even complimented him, though their praise felt hollow compared to the satisfaction he felt inside. The judges spent extra time examining his project, peppering him with technical questions that Marcus answered confidently. Though he still struggled with self-doubt, he couldn't deny the pride swelling in his chest. Later that evening, as Marcus walked home under the fading sunlight, he replayed the day's events in his mind. The laughter, the gasps, the looks of disbelief. It all seemed surreal. For so long he'd carried the weight of being underestimated, of feeling invisible. But today, even if only for a moment, he'd stepped into the spotlight and shown the world what he was capable of. Little did Marcus know, this was just the beginning. News of his invention spread quickly, reaching ears far beyond the walls of his school. Reporters called the principal, eager to interview the boy who had turned sound into light. Teachers apologized for overlooking his brilliance, promising to pay closer attention in the future. And the bullies? They suddenly wanted nothing more than to befriend him, desperate to claim they'd known all along how talented he was. But Marcus wasn't interested in their apologies or false camaraderie. All he cared about was continuing to push boundaries, to explore new ideas and possibilities. As he entered his apartment that evening, Tia greeted him with a grin. "Told you you'd change the world someday," she said, throwing her arms around him. Marcus smiled faintly, ruffling her hair. "Maybe," he replied, "but I'm not done yet." And with that, he returned to his workbench, already dreaming of his next invention. The days following the science fair were unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. What started as a quiet moment of triumph in the corner of the gymnasium quickly turned into something much bigger. Word of his invention spread like wildfire, first through the school, then across the entire town. Teachers who had once overlooked him began mentioning his name in staff meetings. Students who used to mock him now whispered about him in awe. Even local news outlets caught wind of the story, dubbing Marcus the boy who harnessed sound. For someone who had spent years feeling invisible, it was overwhelming, and not always in a good way. At first, Marcus tried to ignore the attention. He continued going to school, sitting quietly in class and eating lunch alone under the same tree where he'd sketched countless diagrams. But ignoring the whispers proved impossible. Everywhere he went, people stared at him, some with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with thinly veiled jealousy. The bullies who had tormented him for years suddenly wanted nothing more than to befriend him. Jake, the ringleader of the group, approached him one afternoon after class, scratching the back of his neck nervously. "Hey, Marcus," Jake began, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Look, I just wanted to say, we didn't mean all that stuff we said before. You know, about you being, He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Marcus looked at him evenly, his expression unreadable. "Being what?" he asked, his tone calm but firm. Jake hesitated, glancing around as if searching for help from his friends. When none came, he sighed. "You know, calling you names and stuff. We were wrong, okay? You're obviously really smart." For a long moment, Marcus didn't respond. He studied Jake's face, seeing the flicker of guilt behind the boy's forced smile. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady. "I don't need your apologies," he said. "What I want is for you to remember what it feels like to underestimate someone, to judge them without knowing anything about them. Because one day you might meet someone else like me, and I hope you'll think twice before treating them the way you treated me." Jake opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. Instead, he nodded slowly, looking genuinely ashamed, and walked away. Behind him, his friends lingered awkwardly for a moment before dispersing, leaving Marcus alone once again. It wasn't forgiveness he sought from them. It was understanding. And while he doubted they fully grasped the weight of his words, he hoped they'd carry the lesson with them. As the days passed, Marcus found himself thrust into situations he'd never imagined. Reporters arrived at the school, eager to interview the young inventor who had created something so groundbreaking. Cameras flashed as microphones were shoved into his face, reporters firing questions faster than he could answer. "How does it feel to be called a genius?" one asked. "What inspired you to invent this?" another pressed. Marcus answered, politely but briefly, uncomfortable with the spotlight. He didn't see himself as extraordinary, just determined. Local leaders took notice too. The mayor invited Marcus to speak at a community event honoring young innovators, praising him as an example of resilience and brilliance. At first, Marcus declined, intimidated by the idea of addressing a large crowd. But when Tia begged him to go, "You have to show them how amazing you are," he reluctantly agreed. Standing on stage that evening, surrounded by strangers clapping and cheering, Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and discomfort. He wasn't used to being celebrated, and the attention made him uneasy. Still, he delivered his speech with quiet confidence, sharing his journey and encouraging others to pursue their passions despite obstacles. Back at school, the dynamics began to shift. Students who had ignored Marcus, or worse, bullied him, now sought him out hoping to learn more about his work. Some genuinely admired him, asking thoughtful questions about his inventions and offering to help with future projects. Others were less sincere, trying to ride the coattails of his newfound fame. Marcus remained cautious, keeping his distance from those he didn't trust. But he allowed himself to open up slightly to a few classmates who seemed genuinely interested in his ideas. One of these classmates was Emily, a girl from his math class who had always been kind to him, even when others weren't. She approached him one day during lunch, holding a notebook filled with sketches of her own. "I've been working on a project too," she admitted shyly. "It's not as cool as yours, but I thought maybe you could take a look." Marcus raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Together they sat beneath the tree where he usually ate alone, flipping through Emily's designs. Her project, a system for filtering air pollution using plants, wasn't perfect, but it showed promise. Over the next few weeks, the two began collaborating, bouncing ideas off each other, and refining their respective inventions. For the first time, Marcus felt like he had a real friend, someone who appreciated him for who he was, not because of what he'd achieved. Meanwhile, the impact of Marcus's success extended beyond the walls of his school. Inspired by his story, teachers implemented anti-bullying programs aimed at fostering empathy and inclusion. Posters appeared in hall points reminding students to look beyond appearances and celebrate differences. While some kids rolled their eyes at the cheesy slogans, others took them to heart, recognizing the importance of treating everyone with respect. Tech companies also reached out, eager to collaborate with Marcus on developing his invention further. Representatives visited his home, touring his makeshift workshop and marveling at the ingenuity packed into such a small space. One company offered him funding to refine his prototype, promising to mentor him and provide access to state-of-the-art equipment. Marcus accepted cautiously, aware that stepping into the professional world would bring new challenges. But he was ready, or at least he told himself he was. Despite the whirlwind of attention, Marcus never lost sight of why he'd started inventing in the first place. Late at night, after the reporters had gone home and the house fell silent, he returned to his workbench, tinkering with new ideas. His mind was always racing, always dreaming of ways to improve lives through innovation. The sound-to-energy converter was just the beginning. There were countless problems waiting to be solved, and Marcus intended to tackle as many as he could. Tia watched her brother with pride, often staying up late to keep him company. "You're gonna change the world, Marcus," she said one evening, leaning against his shoulder as he soldered wires together. "I just know it." Marcus smiled faintly, pausing to glance at her. "Maybe," he replied. "But changing the world isn't easy. People will try to stop you, or tell you you're not good enough. You have to believe in yourself no matter what." Tia nodded solemnly, absorbing his words. Though she was younger, she understood the weight of what he'd been through, and the strength it had taken to overcome it. To her, Marcus wasn't just a genius. He was a hero. As the weeks turned into months, life settled into a new rhythm for Marcus. The bullying stopped entirely, replaced by a cautious respect from his peers. Teachers encouraged him to aim higher, pushing him toward advanced classes and competitions. And though the attention occasionally overwhelmed him, Marcus embraced it as part of his journey. He knew that every challenge he faced, every insult, every failure, had shaped him into the person he was today. Resilient, determined, and unapologetically brilliant. Little did he know the greatest chapter of his story was still ahead. Scholarships poured in from universities across the country, each eager to welcome him into their programs. Marcus sifted through the offers carefully, weighing his options. In the end, he chose a prestigious school known for its engineering program, where he hoped to continue pushing boundaries and making a difference. As he prepared to leave his hometown behind, he reflected on how far he'd come and how much farther he intended to go. The boy who had once been mocked for his patched-up backpack and quiet demeanor was now a symbol of possibility. His journey had taught him that intelligence has no single face, and greatness can emerge from the most unexpected places. And as he packed his belongings, ready to step into a brighter future, Marcus carried with him not just his inventions, but the lessons he'd learned along the way. Years had passed since the day Marcus stood in the corner of his school's gymnasium, demonstrating his sound-to-energy converter to a room full of doubters. Now, as he stood on stage at one of the most prestigious universities in the country, accepting a full scholarship funded by a tech giant impressed by his invention, Marcus couldn't help but reflect on how far he'd come. The journey hadn't been easy, far from it, but every challenge, every insult, and every sleepless night had led him to this moment. The auditorium was packed with people, professors, students, industry leaders, and even reporters who had followed his story since that fateful science fair. Cameras flashed as Marcus adjusted the microphone, his hands trembling slightly despite his best efforts to stay calm. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but today was different. Today, he wasn't just speaking for himself. He was speaking for every kid who had ever felt invisible, underestimated, or dismissed because of where they came from or how they looked. "Thank you," Marcus began, his voice steady but soft. "When I first started inventing things, I never imagined I'd be standing here. Back then, my workshop was a tiny bedroom shared with my sister, filled with scraps I found in junkyards. My tools were old and broken, and my notebooks were held together with duct tape. But what I lacked in resources, I made up for with determination." He paused, glancing out at the sea of faces. Some were smiling encouragingly, while others scribbled notes or snapped photos. Marcus took a deep breath before continuing. "I didn't invent the sound-to-energy converter because I wanted fame or recognition. I did it because I wanted to prove something, not to anyone else, but to myself. Growing up, I was told directly and indirectly that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't belong. For a long time, I believed it." The room fell silent as Marcus spoke, his words resonating deeply with many in the audience. "But over time, I realized that the opinions of others don't define you. What defines you is how you respond to those opinions. Do you let them break you, or do you use them as fuel to push forward? For me, it was always about pushing forward. Every failure taught me something new. Every setback reminded me why I started in the first place." As Marcus recounted his journey, he thought back to the bullies who had once taunted him, the teachers who had overlooked him, and the classmates who had laughed at his dreams. None of them were present now, but their impact lingered, not as scars but as lessons. They had taught him resilience, patience, and the importance of believing in himself when no one else did. And though he harbored no ill will toward them, he knew their actions had shaped him into the person he was today. After finishing his speech, Marcus stepped off the stage to thunderous applause. As he walked through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging smiles, he felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything he'd ever known. Yet amidst the celebration, he remained grounded. This wasn't the end of his journey. It was only the beginning. The university offered endless opportunities, from cutting-edge labs to brilliant mentors, and Marcus was eager to dive in. Back in his hometown, Marcus's story became a beacon of hope. Schools implemented anti-bullying programs inspired by his experience, emphasizing empathy, inclusion, and the value of looking beyond appearances. Teachers encouraged students to pursue their passions, reminding them that intelligence comes in many forms. Even the local government got involved, hosting annual innovation fairs to inspire young inventors and provide them with resources to bring their ideas to life. Marcus returned home during breaks, visiting his old school to speak with students. Sitting in the same cafeteria where he had once eaten alone, he shared his story with wide-eyed kids who dreamed of making a difference. "You don't need fancy equipment or expensive materials to create something amazing," he told them. "All you need is an idea, a willingness to learn, and the courage to keep going even when things get tough." His visits left a lasting impression on the students. One girl, barely 10 years old, approached him after his talk, clutching a crumpled piece of paper covered in drawings. "I want to build robots," she said shyly. "Do you think I can?" Marcus smiled warmly, kneeling down to meet her eye level. "Of course you can," he replied. "Start small and don't be afraid to make mistakes. Every great inventor started somewhere." At university, Marcus thrived. Surrounded by like-minded peers and supported by dedicated mentors, he continued to innovate, tackling problems ranging from renewable energy to affordable healthcare solutions. His sound-to-energy converter evolved into a larger-scale project, capable of powering entire households using ambient noise. Companies sought partnerships, governments expressed interest, and environmental organizations hailed his work as groundbreaking. Yet, despite his growing success, Marcus stayed true to his roots. He often called home to check on Tia, who was now excelling in school herself, thanks in part to her brother's encouragement. Their grandmother proudly displayed newspaper clippings about Marcus on the fridge, telling anyone who visited, "That boy's gonna change the world." One evening, as Marcus sat in his dorm room sketching designs for a new invention, he thought about the path that had brought him here. From the quiet boy hiding under a tree to the confident young man inspiring others, his transformation was nothing short of remarkable. But Marcus knew that none of it would have been possible without the struggles he'd faced along the way. Each insult, each moment of loneliness, had pushed him to dig deeper, dream bigger, and refuse to give up. Years later, as Marcus accepted yet another award, this time for his contributions to sustainable technology, he reflected on the legacy he hoped to leave behind. Fame and accolades weren't what drove him. It was the desire to create a better future for everyone. Through his inventions, he aimed to empower communities, protect the planet, and show young people that no obstacle is insurmountable. As he walked off stage that night, diploma in hand, Marcus allowed himself a rare moment of pride. The world had underestimated him once, but it wouldn't make that mistake again. And deep down, he knew that was enough. For Marcus Johnson, the boy who turned sound into light, the journey was far from over. But as he looked ahead, he saw not limits but possibilities, endless horizons waiting to be explored. And with each step forward, he carried the lessons of his past, proving that brilliance knows no boundaries.